Oh, well, there's some real nerdy stuff I do with electrical engineers. You know, talk before things don't work as they intend. This is in houses too. In California, there's a big problem with like duct leakage in the air conditioning system. So you're paying for it, but it leaks out before it gets to where you want. It's lost with ducting under your floor or something if you have a crawl space and something. Refrigerant leaks out of things, dampers get stuck, valves leak. All of that stuff can cause problems. And I'm doing some things with electrical engineers where we can find most of that just by paying real close attention to what happens if the air conditioner first goes on, or a fan goes on, or a pump goes on. In the fraction of a second when something starts up, this little plot here is, well, that's about a half a second or so as it turns out. You get this little pattern. And the pattern for lights looks different from motors and anything else. And I don't know, maybe it's like DNA for motors or something. I don't know. It's all our fingerprints. That's a little better. And then if it doesn't work right, the pattern changes a little bit, and we can detect that stuff. It's just all signal processing stuff that electrical engineers love to do. We're doing a lot of work on air conditioners now with that. It's kind of fun. Okay, last part, 5 minutes or so, and then we'll stop. So here's the pure travel log part. Supposed to look like Russia. It is. Okay. So we have. I guess this is the Kremlin. This is an apartment building. There are thousands of these in Russia and in China too, because the Chinese copied the Russians after World War II. It was called a Khrushchev, built in the 50s when Nikita was around. And the point here, it's almost laughable. So if you built those buildings in Russia up to, the mid-90s or so, how much insulation did you have to have in this building? Magically, it was precisely the insulating value you got in the bricks. You didn't need any rock wool, fiberglass, anything else. Well, brick is not a very good insulator. Okay? And it came out of sort of their construction and what they could afford when they really had to build housing and so on. So it wasn't until the mid-90s that the codes got upgraded, and I work with some people from Natural Resources Defense Council on that. It was a lot of fun. We found the one person in Russia who was writing the building codes and said, Yuri, learn about our system. He came to our house for Thanksgiving one year, didn't he? So, and see how it's done in the West. We take some measurements. He sees all this stuff. We did measurements in Russian apartment buildings, learned a huge amount, and then he went out and did the most effective thing possible, which is to say, from now on, everybody has to insulate the walls. Now, we can laugh at that and say, we're not laughing, maybe we shouldn't, and say, gee, that's pretty silly. Brick's not a very good insulator. How do we build houses in this country now? We build them out of 2x4s, or if we're lucky, 2x6s, which we've been doing for, 150 years or so. And we fill that cavity with insulation. It's whatever the structural system permits. It's not nearly as good as this stuff. And if you want to build that way, you can at least put this stuff on the outside, like that passive Haas thing in Illinois. So we're not a whole lot better. Our construction system dictates what we think we do thermally. Okay, China, I did a bunch of work there. This is in Beijing, so if you go to the Summer Olympics, you not only breathe bad air, but you see all these depressing things that looks like the South Bronx around the 4th Ring Road. They're awful. They're hot, there's no ventilation in them. It's also, I don't know, I can talk about it in social things. This is better. This is near Shanghai. Low-rise, these are the dance pavilions where people get out and do their little exercise thing. That's a lot of fun. These have shaded balconies. Both of these doors open. The balcony itself doesn't have concrete up to the waist of the balustrade, but it's open. So if there is a breeze, it comes in, and you can be reasonably comfortable even when it's fairly warm there. Skip some of this stuff. We did some studies on this sort of thing, and what this is attempting to show, here's outside temperature, this is Beijing, so this is like 93 Fahrenheit. If you have a sort of regular house there, without air conditioning, it might hit 95 inside. Well, that's terrible, so people go out and buy air conditioners. China makes more air conditioners than any other country in the world. But if you shade it, if you ventilate it at night, if you buy good appliances and do other things, outside temperature is still the same, but the inside temperature now is 82, 83 Fahrenheit. And maybe that's borderline, where you say, maybe you don't need air conditioning. Oh, this is northern Pakistan. Pakistan's getting the news. So the deal here is that schools are built without any insulation at all. There's a school. This one at least has seismic reinforcing, so it doesn't fall down when the ground shakes. This is where people live. This is northern Pakistan near China and Afghanistan. It's a beautiful countryside. So kids can't get their education 6 weeks of the year because there's no heat and there's no insulation, and the inside temperature is about the same as the outside temperature. So one thing we did at the time, about 10 years ago, was make some insulation out of wheat chaff. I'll shed it all over your carpet, and if you have a dust buster, I'll clean it up. So these are almost like doormats, and they work about as well as fiberglass you can buy from Lowe's or Home Depot on a kind of per inch basis. And it's using, well, agricultural residue. There's really no waste there. They would use it for something, bedding for animals, or even feed it to ruminant animals. I dropped that. I mean, there's another whole story to this in terms of why there were some issues in terms of making it. But I now have a student who's sort of revived that. There's someone who lives in Norford. Her family does, and she's been working with sort of villages and schools to use this or other insulations, low-cost stuff to make these schools more habitable. This won't save any fuel because they're not using any now anyhow. There's no wood to burn, but economically it'll help. I think about 2 more, and we'll be done. India, done some work there. Villages in the western part of India, in the state of Gujarat that borders Pakistan. Really little, well, houses vary. Some are nice, and some of them are more modest than any sort of shelter you find on the Appalachian Trail in New Hampshire. The issue here isn't insulation. It doesn't get hot. But it's ventilation and cooking fuel, so it's a little bit astray, but maybe just for international education. What's this band of stuff on the wall there? That smudge. It's a fairly fat smudge. It's cow dung. Okay, so our pioneer forefathers, if any of them went west and they burned buffalo chips. This is the same stuff. If you're rich enough in an Indian village to own cattle, when they poop, it doesn't stay on the ground long. Okay, you're putting the cow flops up on the wall to dry it, and then you're cooking on that. What's the problem with that? It gets smoky inside, and the wall gets smudgy here, and that's just a few months worth because it has to be renewed and whitewashed. The ceiling underneath the roof here, it's black. Okay, that's what mothers are breathing. That's what their kids are breathing. Their infants at their side. There's a lot of pulmonary problems associated with that. So part of what we were doing as an architecture department was giving people some options. We made some models. We put them in duffel bags, shipped it to India. People were playing with them. To ways of thinking about construction that would get more daylight in for, say, people can read, and also means of getting the smoke out. Other alternatives are using gaseous fuel. So if you have the dung, you can put it into a biogas digester and then cook on something like a Coleman stove. This will be my, well, I got 2 more. Maybe I might stop with this one. We'll stop with this one. This is one of my all-time favorite buildings. So we'll conclude here. The one I won't show you is a new one at MIT that also is going to be pretty good, but I like this one a heck of a lot better. Anyone been to Zion National Park? Yeah? How long ago?
How long has it been there?
3 or 4 years.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, I was there 3 years ago, and I think it was fairly new. It's a visitor center, and it's a wonderful building. It's hot in the summer. Gene will tell you it's hot in Zion National Park in the summer. It's southern Utah. It gets very hot. What does this building do? It has these towers, and we might say, looks like a fat chimney, but they don't. They're not doing that. This is a technology that has been used in the Persian Gulf region for a couple thousand years. They're towers that allow air to come in at the top, and inside they've got some stuff that's kind of like t-shirt material, just cotton or whatever. I'm not sure what it is in this one. That has some water spritzed on it, so it's wet. And that water evaporates, and that cools the air off. Where does the heat come to evaporate the water? It comes from the air. So that cool air sinks because it's heavier than warm air, and it just sinks down the tower. Kind of like hot air rises up the chimney, that's what we're used to in New England. Cool air goes down these things. It's just the reverse of that. The physics is the same. And then you can see just barely here, there are 2 big openings. So this is almost like a hearth, but instead of seeing little flames dancing in there, you've got this grill, and even when it's 95 outside in the summer, you get this nice cool waft of air that comes out of it. Just a little gentle breeze. It's so nice. They keep the sun off. They've got a place for the air to go out. They've got a little bit of PV on here. and they soak up some sun for the winter time. But these are the big feature there. So there's no AC in it, and in August it was just wonderful. Yeah.
You mentioned it's only 10% humidity.
Yeah.
When it's 100% humidity, it's not going to work.
Oh, of course not. No, but the
okay, principle.
So this is a good place to stop. If you're in the West, you can do that. If you're around here, you can build your passive house equivalent, or insulate your wall cavities if you haven't already done it. The one area I haven't talked about is the hardest, and I can plead time at this point, and we'll ring the bell, is the southeast part of the U.S. Hot and humid is pretty tough. It's not impossible, and if people want to stay afterwards, I can tell you some thoughts about that. But Miami's tough, Houston's tough. New Orleans, some of my colleagues are doing work there, is tough too. But there are better and worse ways of removing humidity from the air. Air conditioning isn't necessarily or conventional air conditioners aren't necessarily the best way of doing that. Thank you for your attention. I don't think I have any more. I've shown you my light bulb. I've shown you the insulation. I'm happy to answer any questions or hang around afterward. And yeah.
Can you talk about the future of photovoltaics? We're all hoping the price will come down to a reasonable
Sure.
return on investment.
Well, I think deep down I'm an optimist about all sorts of things, and some of that I get from my boss at Princeton, who is very optimistic about all of this. And there's serious problems with the population of the world might go down and so on, but the photovoltaics in particular. The deal with all this stuff is buy time and let the PV people do their thing, and there's a lot that ordinary folks like us can do in the next 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years, up to say 2050. For PV itself, there's a lot of work being done now, and I think I think it has to bear fruit. How much, I don't know. There was something in the Globe over the weekend that the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany is going to partner with MIT to work on just this thing. I'm going to have some involvement in that. There's another piece of that is building efficiency. Some of my MIT friends are. There are things about PV that folks like us probably don't even dream about. I mean, we used to think, okay, they're the silicon, it's expensive, and so the cost comes down a little. Is it ever going to be cheap enough so that the man on the street can afford it? People are thinking of all sort of crazy things now, like growing viruses on metal things, but the viruses are sort of genetically modified to produce electricity. And there's some really weird bio things that people are working on that could be just a big breakthrough. Little quantum dot things, chemists are thinking of these things that can produce twice as much energy per photon from the sun. So the material scientists may not be making a whole lot of progress, other than on batteries to store the energy. But chemists and biologists are doing a lot in this area now, and we'll see. But for 30, 40 years, I think a lot's going to happen to lower the cost. Yeah.
What about thin film?
This isn't my field. Thin film right now is it's cheaper than crystalline silicon. It's less efficient. I've heard people say overall the economics are better right now. You get less out of it, but the initial cost is a whole lot less. So, and you can do more with it. You can put it on fabric roofs. I mean, it's more flexible in terms of what you do with it. So, right now it's not a bad choice. Overall, I don't know, if I had more solar exposure, given the house orientation we are right now, I might try some of that. Even people working in the area would say, first start to get the loads down as much as you can. That's going to be cheaper, and then go after the PV if you want to do more. Jean, you had a question?
I was just coming back to using that stuff on the ground. I mean, if I were to be building a house, I still do a 2x4 or 2x6 construction with insulation, and then I put that on the outside, or how would I?
Yeah, you can.
What's supporting my house?
No,